She injected my daughter with salt water during a hearing she designed herself. The syringe slipped from her hand when she realized the room wasn't reacting the way she expected. No shouting. No panic. Just silence, the kind that removes the illusion of authority one breath at a time. The same person who performed that reckless act also chaired the board that governed our neighborhood. That detail landed softly, almost without weight, but it changed the shape of the entire incident. It stopped being a moment and became a boundary. It became a question of jurisdiction, of who believes they are untouchable and why they assume their reach extends further than it does. It became an example of the point where power stops being procedural and becomes performative. And it became the kind of event that demands response not through outrage, but through systems that never forget and never rush. Stories like this aren't about the moment harm occurs. They're about the quiet mechanics that follow how authority behaves when no one pushes back, how it contracts when its limits are enforced, and how quickly the structure around it begins to shift. This was only the beginning. Karen Markwell, senior board officer of the Lakeshore Willow Estates HOA, held the syringe up like it was some kind of exhibit. "This is what you bring into this community," she said, her voice sliding over the room like she'd already won. "And today, we're addressing it." I didn't answer her. I watched her posture instead, the slight tilt of her wrist. The way she positioned herself in front of Ava like this was a performance, and my daughter was nothing more than a prop. The injection wasn't supposed to happen yet. I could tell she'd planned it for later in the hearing. But Karen enjoyed moments where she held power, even if the power was imagined. The stop-scroll moment came when I reminded her, quietly, that she'd chosen the wrong syringe. "That model was discontinued 12 years ago," I told her. "It isn't sterile unless it's sealed, and you opened it barehanded. The shift was small, almost invisible, but it moved through the room anyway." The people in the folding chairs didn't know what that meant. Karen didn't either. But she understood enough to know that something wasn't going according to her script. My name is Elias Porter. I wasn't just a father sitting in a clubhouse waiting for an HOA board to judge me. I'm a biomedical safety technician with enough training to know when something isn't safe, when contamination is present, when someone is pretending to understand medical protocols they've never studied. I've spent my entire career ensuring that the kind of shortcuts Karen was taking never touched another human being. And now she was standing over my daughter with a needle she didn't understand. Ava sat in the chair beside me, her arm tucked close to her chest. The sterile saline flushes she received at home were simple, safe, and necessary. Her vascular condition required monitoring, gentleness, precision, not theatrics. Not kitchen-made mixtures Karen pulled together to amplify her accusations. This wasn't about a violation. This wasn't about medical waste disposal or community safety. This was about someone who had worn authority for so long she believed it covered her in every situation, even one she didn't comprehend. And that made her dangerous. The emotional grounding came sharp and low in my chest as Karen stepped closer to Ava. My daughter didn't understand what was happening. She trusted rules and order, because that's how our home worked. If someone in charge said something, she assumed they had the training to back it. She didn't see the edges of Karen's confidence fraying the way I did. "Where are you watching from?" I asked internally, not out loud, knowing the people who hear stories like this need a moment to decide where they stand. Because what happened next wasn't something anyone could have prepared for. Karen moved fast, too fast. One motion, no pause, no warning. She gripped Ava's arm and pressed the needle in before anyone could react. A few gasps, a few chairs scraping back, but nothing that could stop the push of her thumb on the plunger. Ava's skin tightened, her breath hitched, and the moment the solution entered her bloodstream, her eyes widened in confusion, then fear. I caught her as she slumped. Karen froze, her performance collapsing mid-scene. "It's saline," she said, but the tremor in her voice betrayed the certainty she thought she had. She didn't understand that the problem wasn't the salt. It was the contamination, the bateria, the concentration, the ignorance. The clubhouse shifted from spectacle to aftermath in seconds. My training snapped forward before the grief could. I checked Ava's pulse, her breathing, her color. The room went quiet enough to hear the hum of the fluorescent light overhead. This was the moment the victory strategy began, because actions like hers trigger systems bigger than HOA boards and louder than personal ego. Systems that do not wait for permission to intervene. And Karen had just crossed a line those systems never overlook. The paramedics arrived within minutes, but the room still felt suspended in the same stunned silence that followed Karen's injection. I stayed beside Ava until they took her, my hands steady, even as my mind catalogued every detail: her breathing, the delayed capillary refill, the faint discoloration along her arm. Nothing about this was normal, but that was why my training existed. When they lifted the stretcher, I followed them out of the clubhouse and into the walkway leading toward the ambulance bay. The sharp winter air hit my face as the doors closed behind us. Karen didn't follow. She lingered in the doorway, gripping the side of the frame like she needed something to hold her upright. Behind her, the residents who'd filled the chairs for the so-called hearing scattered without direction, suddenly uncertain about the authority they'd trusted a few minutes earlier. I stepped into the ambulance, keeping my eyes on Ava, not the crowd forming outside. The gurney brackets locked into place. The medic asked for details, but he didn't need them. The evidence sat in the red irritation spreading across Ava's arm. I answered anyway, quietly and precisely, because accuracy mattered more than emotion. Contaminated solution, unknown concentration, improper application, homemade mixture, non-sterile syringe. Each phrase built a chain far stronger than anything Karen had attempted to stage. The ambulance pulled away from the clubhouse. The neighborhood looked different from inside that space, a series of homes arranged around a drained lake, all of it still and brittle in the cold. The cracked basin appeared through the window as we passed it, a hollow reminder of things once full. I caught a glimpse of it before we turned the corner, a stretch of concrete that mirrored the emptiness left when trust is drained from a community. At the hospital intake bay, I stepped aside as the team moved Ava inside. Their pace was efficient, controlled, not rushed. It grounded me. Systems were already activating around the event, and those systems didn't rely on emotion or panic. They relied on procedure. And once a minor had been injected by an unqualified adult in a public setting, the reporting chain triggered automatically. Inside the triage unit, the lights were softer, but the air still held the metallic edge of disinfectant. I stood at the foot of the bed while the nurse assessed Ava. She murmured instructions to the tech: blood pressure, oxygen saturation, neurological check. Each step confirmed what I already suspected. Irritated vascular response, localized reaction, no full anaphylaxis. It meant she'd recover. It also meant the evidence remained intact. When they escorted me into the consultation alcove just outside the triage curtain, I recognized the shift happening behind the scenes. The hospital had initiated a mandatory report for suspected medical endangerment. They didn't ask if I wanted them to. The law didn't require permission. The moment Karen pushed that needle into my daughter, the situation passed out of her hands and into a jurisdiction she couldn't manipulate. A hospital case coordinator walked in, tablet in hand, and introduced herself. Her tone stayed neutral, controlled. She wasn't looking for emotion. She wanted a clear account. I gave her one. Not opinions, not accusations. Just facts, dates, times, medical context, the make and model of the syringe Karen had used, the known risks of non-sterile mixtures, and the observed reaction. I watched her expression shift as she typed. Not shock, recognition. She understood exactly what this incident represented. It wasn't an HOA dispute anymore. It fell under health and safety enforcement. That was the first step of the victory strategy, taking shape not through what I demanded, but through what the system required. When the coordinator stepped away, a second official approached, this one from the hospital's compliance unit. He asked one question that clarified everything. Was this performed during an organized proceeding? I answered truthfully, yes. It took place during an HOA disciplinary hearing. That was the moment the boundary widened again. Organized proceedings meant organizational liability. Organizational liability meant state review. State review meant the HOA wouldn't be able to manage the crisis internally. The system was already pulling the incident upward, level by level, until it reached the jurisdiction capable of handling it. In the corridor, I heard the familiar cadence of measured footsteps. Not hurried, not hesitant, procedural. I didn't need to turn to recognize the tone of the voice that followed. My wife, Judge Marisol Porter, had arrived. She paused a few feet from me, her gaze steady and unreadable. the same posture she used during emergency assignments that required temporary judicial presence. The hospital had notified the county rotation. She was nearest to the scene. She would oversee the procedural intake until a replacement judge was assigned. She spoke quietly, acknowledging the conflict of interest, already preparing to recuse. This wasn't her case. It would never be her case. But her presence signaled what jurisdiction the incident had reached, and it meant Karen was operating far outside her depth. Marisol stepped back as soon as the interim judge arrived, her posture composed, her voice controlled. She recused herself formally in the hallway, the language clipped and procedural. Once the paperwork transferred to the substitute judge, she shifted from official presence to quiet support, standing beside me without leaning in. Even here, she maintained boundaries that mattered. She had to. That was the point of her oath. But the fact that she'd been called at all was another sign. The system had already moved this out of HOA territory and into something far wider. A nurse approached to update us on Ava's stabilization, and when she left, the hallway cleared enough for me to see who lingered near the automatic doors, shoulders drawn in, hands clasped tight, weight shifting from foot to foot, avoiding eye contact with every staff member who passed. Terrell Haynes stood there like someone trying to blend into walls that offered no cover. He was the only board member who followed the ambulance to the hospital, but he hadn't walked past the threshold. His guilt clung to him visibly. He kept rubbing the edge of a paper wristband the security desk had given him, twisting it around his fingers like he needed something to keep his hands busy. His gaze drifted toward me in brief flickers before retreating again. If avoidance had a shape, it would have looked like the curve of his spine in that moment. I walked toward him. He straightened automatically, but not out of confidence, out of instinct. "I shouldn't be here," he said quietly, shifting his weight again. "But I had to see if Ava was all right." His voice wavered the same way his eyes did when they tried and failed to settle on one spot. He wasn't responsible for the injection, but he'd seen enough leading up to it to feel implicated. That was how complicity worked. It didn't require intent. It only required silence. "You followed us," I said. Simple, direct, not accusatory. His throat tightened at the words. "I know what she did," he whispered, "and I know what could happen because of it." He pressed his fingertips to his forehead, exhaling like someone trying not to crack in a hallway full of witnesses. His breathing picked up. His shoulders rose, then fell, then rose again. He wasn't built for conflict, but conflict had arrived anyway. Marisol watched him quietly, reading his body language the same way I did. Terrell's internal struggle was plain in every gesture. He kept folding his arms, unfolding them, then clasping his hands again. At one point, he stepped toward the waiting area, only to stop mid-stride, frozen by indecision. He wasn't trying to leave. He was trying to escape the weight of what he knew. "Terrell," I said, keeping my voice low, "what are you afraid of?" His jaw clenched. He couldn't answer. Or maybe he didn't know how. His eyes flicked toward the floor, then toward the elevator, then upward like he was searching for words that wouldn't condemn him. The substitute judge exited the administrative office at the far end of the hall, carrying the printed incident summary the hospital had already provided. Terrell's breathing hitched. He understood exactly what that paper meant. The situation now existed inside systems he couldn't reason with or persuade. Systems that didn't care about HOA politics or internal dynamics. Systems that responded to procedure, not preference. Karen's authority didn't reach here, but accountability did. A nurse called my name, motioning me into the small family consultation room beside the radiology wing. Its walls were a muted beige, lined with laminated emergency charts. A soft hum from the ventilation unit filled the space. It was a stark contrast to the polished chaos of the clubhouse. Here, everything was orderly, regulated, documented. That mattered. The nurse provided Ava's updated vitals. The irritation was localized. Hydration was stable. No signs of systemic infection yet, but she would stay under observation. They'd continue monitoring her vascular response for any delayed complications. It was the kind of environment where precision replaced panic. When the nurse left, Terrell stepped into the doorway, hovering like someone torn between entering and fleeing. His fingers tapped rapidly against the side of the doorframe before he pulled his hand back, as if he realized the motion revealed too much. "I should have stopped her," he murmured. "I saw her backstage. I saw the syringe. I thought it was just for show, and I didn't say anything." That admission mattered more than he realized. Witness testimony wasn't just helpful, it moved the victory strategy forward. Outside authority intervention needed clarity, and Terrell held pieces of the sequence Karen tried to orchestrate. Marisol didn't respond for him. Neither did I. Silence did more. It left space for the truth to surface without pressure. Terrell swallowed hard. "If investigators ask, I'll tell them everything. I don't want to be part of covering this up." He finally looked at me fully, without flinching. His guilt had settled into something sharper, something close to resolve. The system had its first internal crack. As he stepped back, he hesitated, glancing once more toward the consultation room. If people knew what she was doing behind the scenes, they'd understand. "They will," I said. Zone. For anyone listening to this kind of story, moments like this matter. If you want more HOA takedowns where the truth eventually finds its way to the surface, subscribe right now and follow the next parts as they unfold. Terrell's footsteps faded down the hallway, and the door to the consultation room closed with a soft click behind him. The moment settled like a held breath, quiet, contained, inevitable. His confession had created the first internal fracture in the board, but fractures don't break anything on their own. Pressure does, and pressure was already building. A nurse guided me toward the family waiting lounge, a wide room lined with glass panels overlooking the hospital courtyard. It was a new setting, open and bright, designed to calm people who had little control over what happened behind closed doors. I took a seat near the window, feeling the low vibration of the heating system humming through the bench. The sound steadied me. Marisol stayed close, not as a judge now, but as someone who understood procedure better than anyone. She didn't fill the silence with questions. She didn't need to. Everything happening was already moving through channels she trusted. When authority works correctly, it doesn't rush. It advances in measured increments, collecting weight as it goes. A staff liaison from the county's emergency review team entered the lounge with a tablet in hand. She scanned the room, spotted me, and approached with the same composed stride I recognized from other cases I'd observed through Marisol's work. Her voice was low, professional. "We received the preliminary hospital report. We'll need your statement in full before we classify it for escalation." Escalation, a word with steps built into it. I followed her to a private review alcove across from the pediatric wing. Glass walls, frosted striping, a table bolted to the floor. The room was designed for clarity, not comfort. She activated the recorder and nodded for me to begin. I repeated the sequence of events in order, focusing only on facts: the hearing structure, the mock courtroom, the syringe, the contamination risk, the injection, Ava's reaction. No speculation, no anger. Just the details that governed liability, negligence, and unauthorized medical procedure. When I finished, she asked one question that carried more weight than any other. Did the HOA board endorse or approve the demonstration? "No," I said. That was Karen's decision alone. But it took place during an official disciplinary hearing. Her stylist paused mid-air only for a second, but I caught it. She understood exactly what that meant. The hearing gave the act structure. The structure gave the act organizational context. Context created automatic jurisdictional review. Outside authority intervention wasn't a strategy I had to push for. It was already unfolding. When the liaison stepped out to send the report to the county's intake system, I walked back toward the waiting lounge. The glass corridor overlooked the ambulance drop-off, and through it I saw a familiar hunched figure standing beside the metal benches near the curb. Karen. She wasn't inside the hospital. She wasn't asking for updates on the child she injected. She stood outside like someone calculating her next move, her hands gripping her phone in a white-knuckled hold. Her coat collar was raised too high, as though she believed it could hide the tension tightening every muscle in her jaw. Her shoulders jerked when she noticed the paramedic unloading new equipment from a truck. Fear wasn't her usual expression, but it sat there now, unmistakable. She'd realized the situation had moved beyond her control. I watched her from behind the glass, not moving toward her, not speaking. This wasn't the moment for confrontation. The system didn't need me to apply pressure. Her reaction told me the pressure was already finding her. tightening around every decision she'd made. When she finally lifted her phone, she hunched over it, typing rapidly. Her movements were sharp, panicked, nothing like the staged confidence she'd displayed earlier in the clubhouse. Whatever she sent, whoever she contacted, it didn't matter. Panic never outruns procedure. Panic just reveals where someone believes the walls are. A nurse approached me with another update. "We've consulted with toxicology," she said. "They want to run additional labs on the solution if you still have access to the syringe used." Access. Evidence. Chain of custody. "I know exactly where it is," I said. The syringe had been collected at the clubhouse by paramedics and sealed for transport. It would move through the hospital's intake protocols next. They'd preserve it, test it, document it. Every test would widen the gap between Karen's version of events and the truth. The nurse nodded and moved on. I stayed near the window, watching the scene outside shift as Karen paced along the sidewalk. She kept glancing toward the entrance but never stepped through it. She wasn't avoiding me. She was avoiding the documentation waiting inside. The forms, the signatures, the accountability. Behind me, the liaison returned. "Your statement has triggered a mandatory dual-agency review," she said. "County Health and State Oversight will be contacting you soon." There it was, the next step. Clean, predictable, unstoppable. Some HOA conflicts linger because people don't know how systems operate. But once an incident crosses into health and safety jurisdiction, the process becomes procedural, not emotional, not debatable. As the liaison left, I looked out the window one last time. Karen had disappeared from the curb, but the system hadn't. Karen vanished from the hospital curb, but the pressure she'd tried to outrun stayed exactly where it needed to be. The liaison's footsteps faded, and the corridor settled into a steady rhythm, the soft hum of the ventilation system, the distant echo of rolling carts, the muted voices behind partition curtains. Procedure never rushed, but it never stalled either. It just moved. I checked on Ava once more, confirming her vitals on the monitor. Stable, resting, under observation. Everything handled by people who understood what they were doing. That alone separated this place from the false authority Karen had wielded in the clubhouse. Here, competence wasn't performed. It was measured. With Ava settled, the nurse directed me downstairs to the hospital's administrative wing, where the county health representative had set up a temporary review station. A different setting, different energy. The walls carried framed posters detailing exposure protocols and contamination flow charts. Professionals walked with purpose, not pretense. Fluorescent lighting reflected off clean tiles, and every movement echoed with the quiet certainty of recorded steps. I entered the conference area, where a long metal table sat beneath a digital screen displaying intake logs. A county health investigator's sharp gaze, steady posture gestured for me to sit. She didn't introduce herself with dramatics, just a name, a title, and a clipboard filled with structured fields. This was her world, and people like Karen didn't intimidate people like her. "We're opening the preliminary environmental health assessment," she said. "We'll need your professional observation." Professional observation, not testimony, not opinion. That distinction mattered. It was the next step in the victory strategy, outside authority intervention triggered by the incident, strengthened by my expertise. She placed the sealed evidence pouch on the table. Inside, the syringe, the same cheap model Karen brandished like a prop. The evidence collected by paramedics was intact, labeled, time-stamped, and chain of custody verified. The investigator broke the seal with a controlled motion and slid the pouch toward me. "Walk us through the safety risks based on what you saw," she said. I did exactly that, fact by fact. No embellishment. This syringe was not sterile. It's a discontinued model. The plunger chamber shows micro-scoring consistent with reused equipment. The tip isn't factory cut. It was likely handled without gloves. The mixture inside was cloudy visible contamination or improper dissolution, and she injected it into a minor without any medical authority. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Precision carried its own weight. The investigator recorded every detail, her pen moving with the same even pace as her breathing. She didn't react emotionally. She processed, evaluated, categorized. These were the kinds of professionals who understood when a case required escalation, and escalation was already forming like a slow-moving tide, Another official entered, a public health supervisor from the county branch. She reviewed the notes, nodded once, and said, "We'll need the hearing layout." Was the act witnessed by multiple residents? Her tone held no urgency, just inevitability. "Yes," I said. "Full attendance." "Good," she replied. "Public setting strengthens classification. We'll coordinate with the oversight body." The supervisor moved on to the next file, and the investigator turned back to me. "We may need you for a contamination risk model later," she added. "Your background will be useful." Useful. The word didn't feel like praise. It felt like alignment. My training wasn't just relevant, it fit directly into the protocol they were about to activate. Outside, through the window behind the table, I saw the hospital courtyard again. Calm. Controlled. Nothing about the environment hinted at the storm gathering around Karen. That's how procedural systems work. They don't look like force until they're fully assembled. When the session ended, the investigator provided a printed summary for my records. I tucked it into my jacket, knowing the document itself wasn't the weapon. The system behind it was. I stepped back into the hallway and checked my phone. 8 missed calls, 3 messages, all from HOA board numbers, not one from Karen. Fear rarely announces itself so directly. As I exited the administrative wing, the automatic doors opened into the cold air outside. My breath curled into the sharp wind, and the scent of winter settled along the walkway. A different setting from the ones earlier. Cleaner. Clearer. A place where decisions didn't hide behind ceremony. Terrell stood near the visitor bench, scrolling through his phone with frantic motions. When he saw me, he straightened again, hands dropping to his sides. "She's panicking," he said. "She's messaging the board group chat nonstop, trying to spin it, trying to get ahead of it." "She won't," I said. "Not this time." He nodded but kept shifting his weight, his guilt still tugging at him. Every so often he rubbed his palms together like he was trying to warm them or steady himself. His body language still held that same internal conflict, but something in him was moving slowly toward resolve. The county investigator stepped outside behind us, speaking into her radio. "This is confirmed for escalation. Initiate dual agency review." Her voice carried across the walkway. Calm. Sifting. Procedural. For anyone following this story, the cracks you're seeing here aren't accidents. They're the beginning of accountability. If you want more HOA justice stories, where power finally meets its limits, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the next part. The investigator's radio transmission still echoed faintly across the walkway as she stepped back inside, leaving the cold air to settle around the 3 of us. Terrell shifted again, rubbing his hands together like he could scrub the guilt out through friction. I didn't push him. Pressure worked better when it came from systems, not people, and the system was already widening around Karen with each procedural step. I walked toward the parking structure where the hospital staff directed long-term visitors. The structure rose in a concrete spiral, its interior dimly lit by yellow overhead lamps. A new setting, quieter than the administrative wing and stripped of the polished calm inside the hospital. My footsteps echoed up the ramp as I took the stairs instead of the elevator, needing the movement, the sound, the isolation. Halfway up, my phone buzzed. A message from the county health liaison. State oversight has been notified. Expect contact within the hour. Another step upward. Another message followed. Prepare any contamination expertise documentation you can summarize without breaching workplace confidentiality. They didn't ask if I wanted to participate. They asked what I could provide. That was the difference between involvement and obligation. Once an incident entered public jurisdiction, personal preference no longer shaped its direction. At the top level, the open-air lot stretched across the rooftop, the wind harsher here. Cars lined the yellow-painted spaces. A few people paced near their vehicles, but most spots were still. I walked toward the far edge and leaned against the concrete barrier overlooking Lakeshore Willow Estates in the distance. From up here, the neighborhood looked compressed rows of homes circling the drained lake basin like a ring around an old wound. My phone buzzed again, this time a call. I answered. "Mr. Porter," a voice said, clipped and formal. "This is the state oversight duty officer. We're coordinating with county health regarding the incident involving a minor. Your expertise is required for the classification review." Required, not requested. The phrasing mattered. He continued, We're sending an investigator to your residence to secure environmental context. Is the household accessible? Yes, I said. You'll have full access to our medical setup. Everything is documented. Good. That will expedite classification. The call ended without pleasantries. Oversight didn't need them. They dealt in thresholds, not feelings. I stayed at the rooftop edge a moment longer, watching the neighborhood that had become the center of this breach. The basin's cracked concrete reflected a thin sheet of pale afternoon light, fractured by uneven lines left behind by years of neglect. It reminded me how authority erodes when it's not maintained. What Karen did didn't come from power, it came from decay. As I turned back toward my car, I saw a familiar figure enter the rooftop level. Terrell had followed me up the stairs, but he stayed near the entrance, hands tucked into his coat pockets. His internal struggle clung to him in the way he held his shoulders, tight and hunched, as if preparing for impact. "I can't go home yet," he said, his voice scattered by the wind. "I keep thinking about what I saw before the hearing." "What part?" I asked. He exhaled sharply, staring at the concrete under his feet. She was rehearsing. Not the speech, the injection. She held the syringe up to the mirror, practiced gripping it, practiced the angle. She wanted it to look controlled. His words didn't carry shock. They carried resignation. "That matters," I said. Preparation. Deliberate action. Terrell looked up then, his eyes reflecting something heavier than guilt-fear of what his silence enabled. "I didn't think she'd go through with it," he whispered. "But I saw enough that I should have said something. And now investigators are going to ask what I knew." "They will," I said, "and you're going to tell them." He nodded slowly, but the tension in his spine didn't ease. His hands moved again, fingers tapping against his sleeves. "Do you think this is going to get bigger?" he asked. "It already has." He swallowed hard, turning to look toward the distant neighborhood. When Karen gets scared, she tries to control everything. She's already messaging the board nonstop. If she thinks the state is involved, his voice trailed off. "She'll make mistakes," I said. He paused. "Or she'll try to drag the rest of us down with her. That's why systems exist," I replied. "People can panic. Systems don't." Down below, a siren wailed briefly before fading toward another district. I walked to my car and unlocked the door, the beep echoing across the rooftop. As I opened the door, my phone lit again, this time with an unknown number. "Mr. Porter," the caller said. "State Oversight Investigator Madsen. I've just arrived at your residence. We're beginning initial environmental review. You'll receive a summary within the hour." The process had reached my home. That meant the next phase of the investigation had officially begun. I ended the call and glanced once more at the drained lake basin in the distance. The wind carried the faint smell of cold dust, sharp and clean. Karen had tried to stage control, but procedure had taken the lead now, and procedure never gives it back. Investigator Madsen's call ended, and the rooftop wind pressed against me, colder now, as if the temperature had dropped with the weight of the review shifting to my home. I sat inside the car for a moment, letting the engine idle while I gathered my thoughts. Procedure had moved forward again, widening its reach. That was the rhythm now. Each step followed the one before it, not because anyone demanded it, but because that's how systems protect the public when someone crosses a boundary as recklessly as Karen had. I pulled out of the parking structure and headed toward Lakeshore Willow Estates. The road curved along the perimeter of the cracked lake basin, the concrete expanse catching the last of the late afternoon light. I slowed at the turn leading to my street, and that's when I saw Terrell, standing near the entrance of the community garden. A different setting. A strip of fenced soil lined with dormant plants and raised wooden beds, all layered in winter stillness. The garden had always been one of the neighborhood's quieter places, maintained mostly by retirees and families who wanted something rooted in a place that felt increasingly eroded. Terrell wasn't gardening. He stood beside the rusted metal gate, fingers gripping the top edge so tightly his knuckles had turned pale. His coat hung open despite the cold wind pressing the fabric against his ribs. He looked like he'd been standing there a long time. I parked and approached him. He didn't turn. "I didn't know where else to go," he said, his voice low, almost swallowed by the wind. "She's at it again. Messaging, calling, trying to get ahead of whatever's coming." "You don't have to answer her," I said. "That's not what I'm worried about." His hands tightened on the gate. I came here because I needed to look at this place before I talked to you. He finally released the metal and stepped into the garden. I followed. The soil was hard beneath our shoes. The raised bed near the far corner held a single small tree-thin young, its branches fragile. A nameplate sat at the base, weathered but readable, for Lucas. Terrell's voice trembled when he spoke. My son planted that tree before he passed. He stared at it, jaw tight. It was the only thing he ever asked the HOA to approve. Just a little tree in the corner of the community garden. Something he could take care of. The wind moved across the branches, making a faint rattling sound. He died before it bloomed for the first time, Terrell whispered. And the week after the funeral, Karen filed a violation notice against it. I felt the impact of the words without him needing to explain further. She said the tree wasn't on the approved landscape list, he continued. Said it disrupted the design uniformity. I begged her to leave it. I told her what it meant. She still pushed the removal order. Told me rules were rules. Told me emotional attachments didn't matter. He swallowed hard. I fought her on it, but the other board members sided with her because she handled compliance. The pain in his voice wasn't loud. It was quiet enough to carry weight. That's why I stayed on the board, he said. I thought if I stayed, she couldn't pressure the garden volunteers to cut it down. I thought I could protect it. Protect what I had left of him. But that meant keeping my head down, not pushing back when she went after other people. His voice cracked. Including you. The guilt he'd been carrying since the clubhouse wasn't just about what he'd seen. It was about what he'd been protecting and what that protection had cost everyone else. He turned toward me fully for the first time. I need you to understand something. Before the hearing, Karen told me she was planning a demonstration. She never said it would involve your daughter. But she kept talking about how optics mattered, how homeowners only listened when things looked dramatic. He exhaled sharply. She practiced the injection because she wanted it to look like you were exaggerating your daughter's condition. She thought if she showed it didn't hurt her, she could discredit every medical accommodation you requested. The wind pressed against the side of the shed near the fence, metal creaking under the pressure. That's intent, I said quietly. That's why I had to tell you, he replied, and why I'll tell investigators the same thing. I'm done protecting anything she created. If it risks the tree, then so be it. Lucas wouldn't want me to stay silent. His confession didn't just clarify what Karen had done, it strengthened the classification review. Preparation, the misuse of authority, public endangerment, organizational liability. The tree beside us rustled again, fragile branches trembling against the winter air. Tell the investigators everything, I said. Not for me, for him. Terrell nodded, wiping his face with the back of his sleeve. I will. As he stepped out of the garden, I paused near the small tree, letting the cold settle through my breath. This wasn't just an HOA dispute anymore. It had never been. It was a mosaic of losses, of boundaries crossed, of authority stretched until it snapped. And now, the system had what it needed. If you're still following this unfolding mess and want to see exactly how accountability takes shape piece by piece, subscribe right now so you don't miss what happens next. Terrell left the community garden with his shoulders squared for the first time since the incident, and I stayed behind a moment longer, letting the weight of his confession settle. Preparation, emotional leverage. His testimony wouldn't just support the case, it would anchor it. Outside authority intervention works best when the truth isn't fragmented. His story filled the gaps Karen hoped no one would connect. I walked back toward my car, the fading daylight stretching long shadows across the path. The air held that flat stillness winter brings before night settles in. Nothing moved except the brittle branches along the fence, scraping against one another like distant static. I drove from the garden toward the next location the investigators had requested, the HOA office. A different setting, one designed for order but hollowed out by mismanagement. The building sat at the edge of the neighborhood near the drained lake basin, its beige exterior dulled by years of sun. The parking lot was nearly empty except for a single sedan and a golf cart Karen used for compliance patrols. It still bore the faded HOA logo she insisted made her position visible. The office door was unlocked standard during posted hours, but the lights inside were dim, giving the space a muted, half-abandoned feeling. The air smelled faintly of old paper and disinfectant, a sharp contrast to the polished sterility of the hospital. A laminated schedule of community events hung crookedly on the wall beside a bulletin board filled with outdated notices. Investigator Madsen's voice echoed from the back room. "Mr. Porter will be out in a moment." I stepped inside, hearing the low hum of a desktop computer and the soft scratch of pens against paper. Two investigators occupied the space Madsen and a compliance analyst from the state. They were reviewing the interior structure, photographing filing cabinets, logging timestamps. Their presence transformed the room from administrative workspace to evidence site. Madsen gestured toward the conference table. "We're not evaluating documents. We're evaluating process." She tapped the edge of a clipboard. "Community hearings, authority boundaries, safety protocols. These things matter when harm takes place during organized proceedings." "I understand," I said. The compliance analyst pointed to the display stand near the front. "Is that the mock courtroom podium she used?" "Yes." He photographed it from multiple angles, noting the placement, the distance from the chairs, the line of sight to the demonstration table. Everything Karen built for theatrics had become structural evidence. "Walk us through the sequence again," Madsen said, "from where you were standing, from where she stood, from where the syringe was held." I did, step by step, letting my training guide my phrasing. Positioning, proximity, line of action analysis, environmental factors, not emotion, not speculation, procedure. It was the part of my job that always made sense, reconstructing actions to identify failures. As I spoke, a sudden motion caught my eye through the office window. Karen's golf cart rolled into view, stopping abruptly near the curb. Karen climbed out, her movements sharp and frantic. She clutched a stack of binders to her chest, her breath visible in short bursts. She hesitated at the door, gripping the handle with shaking fingers. When she finally entered, the investigators didn't stand or shift. They acknowledged her presence only with brief glances. Karen paused, blinking against the overhead light, trying to reassemble whatever authority she believed she still held. "This is a workspace," she said stiffly. "You can't, this is an active review site," Madsen replied calmly. "We notified the board an hour ago." Karen's jaw tightened. Her eyes darted toward the binders in her arms, then toward the desk. She had brought materials she thought could frame the narrative, but she didn't realize narrative no longer mattered. Classification did. "This review is unnecessary," Karen said. Her voice trembled. It was saline, a routine demonstration. No one was in danger. The compliance analyst didn't argue. He simply lifted the evidence pouch with the syringe inside. The cloudy mixture was visible even through the plastic. Karen froze. "We'll determine the classification," he said. "Not you." Her throat moved as she swallowed. She shifted the binders again, but the gesture wasn't confident. It was desperate, someone trying to hold on to symbols of authority as they slipped away one by one. She stepped toward the desk, but Madsen raised a hand. "You cannot touch anything in this room. Everything is under review." Karen stopped mid-step. The air in the office tightened. Her silence said what she wouldn't admit. She had no power here. The investigators resumed their work, documenting the room centimeter by centimeter. Karen's panic rose in each shallow breath. She went pale when Madsen informed her the state had initiated immediate oversight, meaning all HOA procedures were frozen. "This isn't... You can't," she whispered. "You initiated an action that falls under public health jurisdiction," Madsen said. "Comprehensive review is required." I watched Karen fold inward, her confidence unraveling piece by piece. Terrell's testimony would only strengthen this. Intent mattered. Preparation mattered. And every step she took now made the system grip tighter. As I stepped outside, the wind cut across the parking lot. The lake basin lay beyond the office, cracked and barren, reflecting a dim blue light under the approaching evening. Emptiness that mirrored the collapse already underway. If you're following this story and want more HOA justice tales where the truth dismantles everything built on pretense, hit subscribe so you never miss the next turn in the fight. The wind cut across the parking lot as I stepped away from the HOA office, leaving Karen standing inside the review site with investigators closing in around her. The drained lake basin stretched out beyond the building, but I didn't stay long enough to watch its shadow fall across the cracked concrete. There was more work ahead, and the next phase of the intervention required preparation, not confrontation. I drove toward the research facility where I worked, a secure biomedical testing center on the commercial edge of town, a new setting entirely sterile, brightly lit, built for analysis rather than conflict. I wasn't going there as an employee. My shift had ended hours ago, but I had clearance to access the professional tools I needed to prepare the contamination assessment oversight requested. The badge reader clicked as I entered through the side door, the hallway humming with the low resonance of ventilation units. Everything here operated on regulation, airflow, sanitation, light levels, temperature. Each detail existed to prevent harmful variables. Standing inside that controlled space only sharpened the contrast between trained procedure and what Karen had done. I moved toward Laboratory 4B, where equipment for particulate analysis was housed. The stainless steel counters reflected the white overhead lights in sharp lines. The hum of refrigeration units filled the room in a steady cadence. Here, every surface meant precision, every tool had purpose, and every action could be documented, measured, repeated. I retrieved the digital contamination modeler from the storage cabinet, powering it on. The screen lit up with calibration prompts, and I keyed in the settings needed for basic simulation: solution density, foreign particulate risk, contamination likelihood based on handling environment. While I couldn't access the actual syringe or mixture that was preserved under chain of custody, I could prepare a professional framework oversight could use when analyzing the real sample. That was the role I needed to play now. Not outraged parent, not witness, expert resource. The system required my skill set, and the faster I aligned it with the formal review process, the earlier oversight could classify the incident at the level it deserved. I set the model to run environmental projections based on what I'd observed: cloudiness in the mixture, visible sediment, non-sterile handing, discontinued syringe model, lack of sealed packaging. The program generated risk percentages and contamination failure points. Each number strengthened the framework investigators were building. As the simulation progressed, my phone buzzed. A message from investigator Madsen appeared. "We need your contamination risk summary within the hour. Review committee meets at 6 p.m. Bring any available professional analysis." I typed back a simple confirmation and continued entering data. The laboratory air smelled faintly of ethanol and sterilization solution, grounding me further in the reality Karen never understood: health and safety work isn't improvisation. It's precision and accountability. The very things she avoided. When the model finished running, I exported the findings to a clean report. Neutral terminology, hazard notation, contamination likelihood, injection risk severity. Nothing dramatic. Only facts. And facts carried more weight in public health classification than any argument she could attempt. As I saved the file, footsteps approached from the hall. It was Dr. Meredith Chen, the facility's senior compliance officer, and someone who'd supervised my work for years. She paused in the doorway, observing the active modeler and the notes scattered beside it. "You're working off hours, Elias," she said calmly. Not accusatory, just an observation. "There's been an incident," I said. "Public health will need expert analysis." "I'm preparing the summary." She studied the risk chart on the screen, her eyes narrowing slightly as she traced one of the contamination indicators. "Non-sterile," she muttered. "And this was injected?" "Yes." She straightened. That single movement carried more meaning than words. Public classification won't take long with data like this. Her presence wasn't part of oversight, but her review added another layer of credibility. She didn't offer sympathy, she offered alignment. In her field, personal feelings didn't advance, procedure accuracy did. "Provide the file to oversight directly," she said, "and keep your notes unedited. Raw data will hold up better." I nodded. She left without another word. I packed the device back into its case, printed the risk classifications, and downloaded the digital copy onto a clean drive. Every step was measured, deliberate, documented. This wasn't preparation for a confrontation with Karen. It was preparation for the system evaluating her actions. When I finished, I stepped out of the laboratory into the parking lot. The sun had slipped below the horizon, leaving only streaks of deep blue and orange across the sky. The air was sharper now, pushing against my coat. Across the lot, streetlights flickered on, casting long shadows across the asphalt. It looked nothing like the HOA office, nothing like the hospital, nothing like the community garden. Each setting held a different part of the process. Each one moved the system forward. This one, the lab, held the leverage Karen never saw coming. Not anger, not retaliation. Expertise. I placed the drive in my jacket pocket and locked the door behind me. The next phase of the intervention was ready. I locked the lab door behind me, the metal clicking into place with a finality that matched the shift happening in the investigation. The contamination report sat on the drive in my pocket, ready for oversiight's review. The air in the parking lot carried a colder bite now, and the distant hum of traffic rolled through the open space like a low, steady pulse. Everything was moving toward the next phase. I drove straight to the county administration building the location oversight had chosen for the review committee meeting, a new setting again. The building rose in clean geometric lines against the night sky, its glass facade reflecting the streetlights in sharp, angular shapes. Inside, the lobby carried the familiar scent of polished stone and recycled air, quiet except for the soft echo of footsteps from the security desk. A clerk guided me to the third floor, where conference rooms lined a long hallway. Room 3H was already lit, its frosted glass door glowing faintly. I entered to find Investigator Madsen, the compliance analyst, and 2 additional officials seated around a rectangular table. Folders, tablets, and sealed evidence pouches formed an orderly spread across the surface. "Mr. Porter," Madsen said, nodding toward the empty seat. "We're reviewing the contamination framework now." I placed the drive on the table and slid the printed report beside it. The analyst connected the drive to his tablet, scanning through the numbers with controlled precision. No one spoke while he scrolled. No reactions. No commentary. Just focus. "These figures align with the hospital's preliminary reading," he said after a moment. "Foreign particulate, incorrect salinity, non-sterile handling. Injection risk elevated well beyond acceptable thresholds." The oversight examiner, a woman with a calm, deliberate presence, tapped her pen lightly against the table. "This confirms a significant procedural breach during a community hearing. The act qualifies for classification under public safety endangerment and unauthorized medical demonstration. Classification, not allegation, not accusation. Classification carried consequences that couldn't be negotiated away." "Explain the setup of the hearing again," the examiner said. I walked them through it: room layout, attendance level, podium positioning, demonstration table, and proximity between Karen and my daughter. I described the moment Karen performed the injection, each step tied directly to observable facts. The examiner took notes without breaking eye contact, her expression steady and unreadable. When I finished, she leaned back slightly. Her intentional preparation increases severity. "We've received notice from one of your board members confirming she rehearsed the procedure beforehand." I knew she meant Terrell. His confession in the community garden had found its way into the system. His voice was now a documented component of the review. Madsen turned the syringe pouch over in her hands. "Combined with the discontinued equipment, environmental contamination indicators, and lack of medical authority, this meets criteria for immediate corrective action." Corrective action. The administrative equivalent of the ground shifting under someone's feet. The examiner closed the folder in front of her. "Next step is documenting the organizational response. We'll need to observe the HOA board's actions following the incident. That would take place at the emergency meeting the board had called for the next day one Karen planned to control until oversight requested attendance. The meeting wasn't for theatrics this time. It was for classification delivery. The examiner stood. "Prepare to attend. Your presence is required as a reporting witness. Bring no arguments, just the facts." She left the room without waiting for acknowledgement. The others followed in measured sequence, leaving me alone for a moment with the quiet hum of the overhead light and the evidence still sitting atop the table. I picked up the printed report, folded it once, and slipped it into my jacket. The drive followed. Outside the window, the city lights stretched across the dark horizon like a grid of slow-moving stars. Calm, controlled, prédictable, exactly the opposite of the mock courtroom Karen had staged. I exited the building and walked into the cold air. The parking lot was almost empty, the street lamps casting long shadows across the pavement. My breath curled into the night as I headed toward my car. Across the lot, A figure paced near a bench. I recognized the silhouette Terrell again, hands buried deep in his coat pockets, shoulders tight, gaze fixed on the ground as though searching for footing he'd lost long before the injection happened. When he noticed me, he approached slowly. "They called me," he said. "Oversight. They asked for a full statement. I told them everything." He rubbed his palms together despite wearing gloves. "I think this is finally happening. Everything she did, it's all coming out." "It is," I said. "The meeting tomorrow will formalize classification." Terrell nodded, exhaling hard. "She's not ready for that. She doesn't have to be," I replied. "Systems don't wait for readiness." He looked relieved and terrified at the same time. As he stepped away, I glanced once more at the administration building standing tall against the night. The next phase was set. The meeting would move everything forward. Karen wouldn't control it. She couldn't. Procedure had taken the lead. The administration building faded behind me as I drove toward Lakeshore Willow Estates, the cold night air pressing against the windshield. Tomorrow's meeting wasn't speculation anymore. It was procedure, documented and scheduled. Oversight didn't give warnings, it delivered classifications. And once delivered, they didn't get reversed. The next morning, the community center lot was already packed. Cars lined both sides of the street. Residents gathered in clusters near the entrance, their conversations muffled under the steady buzz of tension. A new primary setting the largest room in the community center where board meetings normally drew a handful of bored homeowners. Today, the entire neighborhood seemed to have arrived. I stepped out of my car, feeling the weight of the crowd shift toward me. Some people nodded. Others watched silently, uncertain where to anchor their reactions. Not sympathy, anticipation. They sensed something irreversible was coming. Inside, chairs filled every inch of the space. People lined the walls, stood near the back, leaned against the windows. Even the raised platform at the front, where the board usually sat, was crowded. Papers rustled. Shoes scuffed. The noise never settled into a single tone. It fluctuated, shallow, sharp, expectant. Karen sat at the center of the board table, posture rigid, knuckles white where she gripped her binder. Her eyes scanned the room, landing briefly on me, quickly jumping away. She wasn't composed. She wasn't confident. She was calculating, and none of her calculations were helping her understand the shape of the room she walked into. Oversight officials stood near the front, clipboards in hand, badges visible. Their presence changed everything. They didn't sit. They watched, observed, measured the behavior of the board and the residents as though the room itself were evidence. A hush spread when the interim judge entered, not Marisol. She stood at the back beside the wall, her expression unreadable, keeping distance from the formal proceedings. The substitute judge took the witness chair at the front, nodding once to the oversight representatives. "We're beginning the compliance and safety review of the Lakeshore Willow Estates HOA board," he said. "All testimony will be recorded." Karen stood abruptly. "This isn't necessary," she snapped, her voice cracking. "I've already explained the situation to the board members." The demonstration was harmless. The crowd stirred. Someone near the back scoffed loudly. A few residents whispered sharply to each other. The tension shifted like a current changing direction. The judge raised a hand. "Sit down, Ms. Mockwell." She hesitated, then sat. Madsen stepped forward, her tone steady. "We will begin with witness statements relevant to the incident and the structure of authority under which it occurred." She called my name first. I walked to the front, feeling the eyes of the room follow. The judge confirmed my presence and identity, then nodded for me to begin. I didn't dramatize anything. I didn't describe emotion. I explained the sequence exactly as it happened. The hearing setup, the syringe, the contamination indicators, the injection, the medical consequences. The room absorbed every word. Not a whisper interrupted the flow. Even the HVAC seemed to quiet itself. When I stepped back, Madsen called the next witness. Terrell Hines. A ripple moved across the seated residents. Terrell stood slowly from the second row, his posture tight but deliberate. He walked toward the front, passing by Karen, who stared at him with wide, imploring eyes. He didn't look at her. The judge instructed him to begin, and Terrell's voice wavered at first. I was present before the hearing. I saw her practicing with the syringe. He paused, gripping the edge of the podium. I thought it was just for show. But she rehearsed the angle, the motion, She wanted it to look controlled. A sharp intake of breath rolled through the audience, and she said, "The optics mattered more than the facts." His voice cracked then, but he didn't stop. She said homeowners only pay attention when things look dramatic. Karen shot up from her seat. "He's lying," she shouted. The judge's gavel struck the table sharply. "Sit down." The crowd reacted this time not with chaos, but with a wave of murmurs, a collective exhale of disbelief. A woman near the front covered her mouth. A man shook his head slowly. This wasn't an accusation anymore. It was a pattern. And patterns had consequences. Oversight officials documented every word. Terrell continued. "She told me she planned a demonstration but didn't explain what she'd do. I didn't know she'd use a minor, but I knew enough to realize I should have stopped her." Karen slammed her binder shut. "You backstabbed me for a tree." Her voice broke into an ugly, shrill pitch. The room erupted not in shouting but in stunned silence, the kind that replaces sound with impact. The judge glanced at the oversight team. "You've heard the testimonies," he said. "Proceed with classification." Madsen stepped forward. "Effective immediately, Lakeshore Willow Estates HOA operations are suspended pending full state oversight review." Gasps rippled across the crowd. Karen stumbled backward into her chair. I watched the room nod her. Because this wasn't about her collapse. It was about the community finally seeing the truth, and procedure wasn't finished yet. The announcement of the suspension settled over the room like a shifting of air pressure, silent, heavy, absolute. Karen didn't speak again. She couldn't. The words had been taken out of her hands by a process she never understood and certainly never respected. Residents rose slowly from their chairs, murmurs spreading through the space in low, stunned waves. The board table remained occupied only by abandoned binders, loose papers, and the hollow space where authority used to sit unquestioned. Oversight officials began collecting their materials. The interim judge rose, nodding once to signal the conclusion of the proceeding. And that was it. No dramatic outbursts, no last-minute pleas. Just procedure doing what it was designed to do: remove power from those who misused it. I stepped away from the front as the crowd parted, breathing in the air that finally felt lighter. Not triumphant, just clear, clean. The kind of clarity that follows when something unstable finally collapses under its own weight. The investigators motioned for me to meet them outside. I followed them through the community center doors and into the open air. The harsh fluorescent glow of the interior faded behind us as we stepped into the early evening light. The sky carried a pale blue sheen, the drained lake basin visible in the distance, a cracked reminder that empty places don't stay empty forever. They fill again, slowly, when the structures that cause the erosion are removed. "This concludes the classification phase," Madsen said as we reached the walkway. Her tone held the same controlled cadence she'd used from the beginning. "State oversight will assume temporary authority over community governance until a replacement board is elected. You may be contacted for procedural follow-up, but your involvement as a reporting witness is complete." Complete. The word landed with the weight of something finally settled. The compliance analyst added, "Charges will be forwarded to the county solicitor. The act qualifies as unauthorized medical procedure, reckless endangerment, and organizational misuse of authority. The state will manage the administrative dissolution." Administrative dissolution. It was the cleanest end an HOA could face the system resetting itself. Terrell stepped out of the community center behind us, his expression raw but relieved. He approached slowly, hands in his coat pockets, shoulders lower than I'd ever seen them. "Is it done?" he asked. "For you, yes," Madsen said. "You cooperated fully. Your testimony supported the classification." Terrell exhaled, almost stumbling from the release of pressure. I didn't think I'd ever see her answer for any of it. "You did the right thing," I said. He nodded, looking toward the lake basin. "I'm going to check on the tree later. Feels like I can finally breathe there again." I understood. Loss changes the spaces tied to it, but accountability can reshape them back into something bearable. The oversight team dispersed toward their vehicles, leaving the community center entrance behind them. Residents filtered out in groups, some whispering, others silent, many glancing toward me with quiet acknowledgement. Not gratitude recognition, not of who I was, but of what had finally been set in motion. I walked toward my car, my steps steady on the concrete. The evening air held a faint chill, brushing against my face as winds swept across the open basin. The cracked floor of the lake looked different now, not a symbol of emptiness, a symbol of transition, a place waiting for something new to fill it. My phone buzzed. A message from the hospital. Ava is awake, stable, asking for you. For the first time that day, something in my chest loosened. At the hospital, the pediatric unit felt warmer than I remembered. The hum of equipment blended with the soft shuffle of nurses moving through the hall. When I walked into Ava's room, she looked up with tired eyes, but managed a small smile. Marisol sat beside her, one hand resting gently on her arm. "She's doing well," my wife said softly. "Vitals are steady." Ava reached for my hand, her fingers curling around mine with the quiet trust she'd always had. Trust I intended to protect with every skill I possessed. I sat beside her, letting the calm settle around us. No courtroom theatrics, no staged authority, just recovery and truth, two things that stand even when everything else falls. The administrative report would proceed. The charges would advance. The community would elect a new board under state supervision. Procedure would continue until every step was complete. And Karen's chapter in this neighborhood had ended exactly the way unchecked authority always does through the systems built to constrain it. I looked at Ava, at Marisol, at the steady heart monitor rhythm filling the room. This was the resolution. Clean. Ordered. Final. If you want more stories of homeowners standing up